Good afternoon to every single one of you guys, Atlanta United family. We have a special guest for you this afternoon, Mr. Jason Longshore. Tommy as well. We're here with him once again. Jason, we're glad to have you here. Thank you for accepting the invite and so coming into the show once again. Basically, Jason, we want to go ahead and basically start off, with a question that you probably don't get very often. And we want to know, like, what really has been, the change from the whole COVID thing. How is it like, being a broadcaster, after the whole COVID situation?
Yeah, it's been a wild ride because we were in Mexico when everything started to shut down last year. We were there for CONCACAF Champions League, and the night that the NBA shut down was that game with Club America. So, I got back into the country because we came back right after the game, and was exhausted because I don't sleep on planes. So we flew overnight and I was exhausted. So got home at like 7 a.m, slept, and woke up to MLS shut down, everything shut down, and kind of not knowing what's going to happen. And then, we got a couple months later, MLS's back tournament started. We had to call all those games remotely. Last season, calling home games with nobody in the stands until the very, very end of the season, then just a handful, calling road games from a monitor, which is always a challenge. It's just different when you're in the building. First off, when you're in the building for a game, even when there's nobody there, you can see everything. Like, you can see when somebody's warming up. You can see what happens off the ball. Like, there's so much more in my role that I can just notice. When you're calling it from a monitor, it's tough. You're really kind of more locked into replays and breaking things down after the fact. You're not able to kind of see everything. And then not having people in the building, it changes the way the broadcast feels completely, because, you get used to being at the bins and hearing the roar of the crowd, like when things are going, or that, anticipation when things are starting to build. You get used to it and you feed off of it. When it's empty and there's just nothing, it's weird. It's hard, I think, at times to capture the emotion of the game, obviously, without the people who provide it, a big portion of it, the fans. So I think, if anything, like, calling games in those environments, I think it's helped me be a better broadcaster, because I think I notice more little things. I know the first couple of games when we got to travel, we got to go to Nashville, and then got on the road again in Cincinnati, and we've been on the road since. Like, I notice more, I pay attention to more. I think I have a broader perspective, and I know I appreciate the atmosphere in different places more than I did before. And I loved it before because you feed off of it, but now it's just such a critical part of the game. So I kind of hope going through all of this has actually made me a better broadcaster in the long run. But it's been tough. It's been kind of all figuring it out as we go. And I've had this conversation with Mike Conti. I've had it with Kevin Egan. I've had it with other broadcasters, from around the league. And we've all kind of had to figure this out on the fly. And it's been tough. But I think finally now it's starting to get back to normal. Games feel normal again. And hopefully, that's all able to continue, and we get into a playoff situation at the end of the year.
Hey, that's what
It was really
everybody.
eerie. Oh, sorry. I was gonna say it was really eerie. I remember the first game back. I think Atlanta United posted a picture of you and Mike Conti in the booth with the trophies behind you and nothing else. It was just darkness. And I just looked at that. I said, "Wow, that's a really just weird picture to see. Everything empty out there, and then they're calling the games."
Those games were so weird because that was MLS's back, and first off, you had a 9 a.m. game, which was bizarre. To get to Mercedes-Benz Stadium to call that remotely at, like, I think I got there at 6:30. Like, it's just the weirdest thing to be up and ready and, like, intense for a game at that time of the day. And it was just hard. I mean, we were able to, and it was a credit to the club to be able to make those broadcasts and everything around it feel as big as we possibly could. You know, we got interviews from people on the ground. They were able to work out getting a feed and interviews from Darren Eales, from Carlos Bocanegra, from guys in the bubble, because, you know, I mean, we didn't have to go be in the bubble for, you know, a month or so, but people did. And it was just the weirdest thing to try to capture and to try to explain, because Mike and I weren't going through it, but we knew how hard it was for the guys who were there and just how challenging it was. And I mean, it's challenging for us to call a game. It was a lot harder for those guys to be in a bubble environment at that time when we really didn't know that much about COVID and everything going on. And, you know, it had to be a little scary at times, but luckily, you know, the league, and I give MLS a ton of credit for getting back on the field, getting games underway. And I think it served them well, and they're in a better position now as things are ramping back up because of that. But it was hard for everybody involved. It's a lot harder for the people who had to play in it and had to deal with being tested every day and that kind of stuff than us. But it was definitely tough to call games in that environment too.
And MLS was the first one back, I think, out of all the sports in the U.S.
Yeah, I believe so, if I remember right. I think the WNBA was around that time as well. The NBA was a little bit later with their bubble, like kind of on the heels of MLS. And nobody really knew. And I mean, go back to some of the conversation around that. There were a lot of people who were like, you can't do this. Everybody's going to get sick. You can't do it. It's wrong to do it. They ultimately got it right. And yeah, they had to figure out with Nashville's situation with a bunch of guys testing positive and not able to play in it. Dallas getting there and having a bunch of positives and having to sequester them. I mean, it was touch and go. And there were some real challenges that the league had to deal with there was no blueprint. There was no book to look back at and say, oh, okay, we dealt with this 5 years ago and this is what we did. It was figured out on the fly, and a lot of people had to kind of trust the advice, trust the experts that they were getting involved in it, and they got it done. And it's a credit to the league to be able to do that. And I think it did help the league moving forward to get that tournament underway.
For sure. And it specifically seems like Atlanta United's done a really good job with it. We haven't seen at least announce many players actually getting it or, you know, having any type of stoppages.
Yeah, I mean, you had Heineman, who told us after the fact, you know, that he had tested positive. There was the situation in training where I think 2 guys in a couple of days tested positive, and they were able to keep that from breaking out. Joseph this year, but he was in Venezuela when that happened, so that's kind of out of the club's purview. It's tough, and you know, it's something that probably won't ever really come out, but you know, we talked about it a lot last year. You look back at the issues that Nashville and Dallas had, and something went wrong. I mean, I think every team that's had some kind of an outbreak, you've been able to go back and track it, and something went wrong. I'm like, I remember Notre Dame football saying that they got lax on protocols, and they had a big meal together in the midst of everything last fall, and they had a bunch of people come up positive after that. Things like that. I mean, teams had to take it very, very seriously. And Atlanta was always ahead of the curve, it felt like, in having protocols in place, progressing from individual training to that like modified group training to then small group training, you know, just making it work. And the results on the field didn't show it. And, you know, we can get into that as you know, I think it's already been hashed out a lot, but losing Joseph Martinez last season obviously wrecks your attack. But the work that the guys, and not just the players, but the technical staffs, the comm staffs, the digital staffs, like everybody had to deal. The facility staff is the one that probably doesn't get enough credit. Everything they had to do to create, you know, a testing place for people to come through and get tested, and then not be able to go into the locker rooms, but be able to have all their equipment taken care of, all that kind of stuff. It's just not easy. And it was a real slog for everybody involved last year. And Atlanta was one of the ones, like you said, that probably handled it as well as anybody in the league.
And it has to help with Arthur. I mean, right now you look, the Falcons have announced that they're 100% vaccinated. I don't know if I've ever heard if Atlanta United was 100% vaccinated, but we saw the pictures of most of their players getting that.
Yeah, I don't.
That's great.
Hearing if Atlanta was 100% vaccinated, but you're right. We did see that where all the players went down to Mercedes-Benz Stadium when they were a vaccination site and got vaccinated. So, I mean, it just helps you be protected, and it's the smart move at this point. And I know it's a hot button issue for some, but it's vital to getting everything as close to normal as we're going to get anytime soon. And I think the teams and the organizations that are taking that seriously are the ones who have avoided a lot of issues with it.
Jason, something that we wanted to touch with you as well. We know that you're very, deep into like everybody in the Atlanta United organization, and something that we wanted to talk to you about. What are the major changes from like the Rob Valentino coaching to what Gonzalo Pineda has bring, whether it's practice, whether it comes to the actual game, to where, we've only seen one game. But it's a lot to judge, honestly, by, the very little that we've seen. So what have you seen from the players and staff around?
I think you almost have to go back to when Rob got the interim job, because that's where the bigger change was. The change from Rob to Gonzalo, it's still early days of it, but it's not drastic. And I think a big reason why is, for the last week plus of Rob's time, he was in contact with Gonzalo, and they were talking through decisions that were made and talking a lot. So, you started to have that transition happen even before Pineda was able to meet the team in DC and be around it. But the transition from Gabriel Heinze to Rob Valentino is where it was dramatic. And a lot of it was the vibe. I think it's going to be really interesting to look back in the long term. And I want to see what happens with Gabriel Heinze and where he ends up next. I studied his philosophy, his tactics, the way he, wants to have his teams play a lot. And I agree with a lot of it. I think, what he did from a foundational element of the way this team can play was good. And we've heard from staff, we've heard from players that the training sessions were good. The tactics were good. The foundation of football was good. It was a lot of the other stuff that was an issue. And I think Rob Valentino being around it, and it's something that I've mentioned a few times that I didn't know at the time, but it's a credit to Rob. Rob was kept on. So Rob Valentino was here as the assistant coach for Atlanta United 2 in 2018. He moved on to Frank DeBoer's staff in 2019, stayed with Stephen Glass's staff when Stephen took over in 2020 when DeBoer parted ways with the club. And he wasn't intended to be part of Gabriel Heinze's staff, but he stayed with the club because the club thinks so highly of Rob Valentino. They created a role for him. He was around. He ended up kind of being an unofficial member of the staff because he got along really well with Heinze's staff. They trusted him. They respected him. There was a lot of mutual respect there, to the point that when the change happened, and look, I think there's been a lot of talk about, Heinze and some of the protocols that weren't followed with the training sessions. And I know the water thing and all of that, days off, all that's there. One thing that is really hard about these situations is his staff also lost their jobs. So his staff, who had just come here, who wasn't as involved in making some of those decisions, they lost their jobs. But they all, from what I was told, reached out to Valentino and congratulated him on getting the opportunity and wished him well. And it's a classy move. It's a very classy move, and it's a mark of the respect for Valentino. But Rob, being around it, knew that the vibe needed to change. So it came in with him, I think, really rebuilding, and in some cases building from scratch, relationships with all the players. It wasn't about dictating down to this is what we do. It was having conversations on even footing with the players, talking about how they feel as people, how they feel within the team, kind of rebuilding the connections that had kind of got frayed a little bit. So Rob started that process. That's something Gonzalo Pineda does really, really well. And I think that's only going to continue. So like tactically in those things, we'll see things evolve. I think Pineda making decisions for the first time in those areas, we'll see it evolve. He might end up playing 4-3-3. He might play 3-4-3. He might move to a 3-5-2. It might be game by game. I'm not as worried about that. I think the biggest difference is going to be this team will play with passion, which they did under Heinze. They played very hard under him. But I think they'll play with a passion and a togetherness and play for one another more, and something that maybe we didn't see as much. I think they'll be more of a family and more bonded together under Valentino, who started that process, and now Pineda, who will continue it on.
Jason, you bring up Heinze. I remember when I think he was terminated on a Sunday and they had a game on Saturday. From I think listening to your broadcast, he came to the podium very late that game. Did you have a feeling that night or even that morning that this was coming?
That whole day was crazy because if I remember correctly, I don't have it in front of me. They went to Nashville, the road game before, and played so hard in that game. I was so impressed with the effort. And, you know, when the results are what they were, you do start to think like, okay, is there going to be a change made? But that Nashville game and the fight that you saw from the players, it's like, okay, maybe not. Maybe it is just going to need more time. Maybe not. And the New England game, it was another performance that was a hardworking performance. Wasn't good enough ultimately. They lost the game to a very good team. But I didn't get the sense that the players had quit on Heinze. I didn't get any of that. And, you know, it wasn't like Chris Armas in Toronto where they gave up 7 goals and, you know, it's time to part ways. It wasn't as clear cut from what we saw publicly. And you also got to remember too, this was still really the end of the stronger COVID protocols. So we weren't around like training sessions at all. We hadn't traveled with the team before the Nashville game, but we didn't travel with the team in Nashville either because Mike and I weren't part of the testing protocol yet. So we had to go separate from the team. So we hadn't been around them under Gabriel Heinze at all, like interacting and seeing it. So we didn't really know. That game, like going into the game, I thought, yeah, it wouldn't shock me if something happened. Then the way the game played out, I'm like, no, I think they're still playing hard. I think it's still okay. Then that long delay, I wondered if there was things going on. And there was also the Joseph situation going on in the background as well at that time. So we didn't have all the information. So we didn't really know what was going on. And it was a little bit of a swirling like idea in my head of, okay, yeah, it's probably going to happen. Okay, it's not going to happen. At the end of the night, when we left, I didn't think it was going to happen the next day. I didn't know if it was going to happen, but I didn't think the next day is when it would happen. And then it happened like late in the afternoon on a Sunday. And ultimately, then going, I think it was Cincinnati was the next trip after that. Ultimately, it was the right decision for things that we didn't really know at the time. Like the results and the performances weren't as bad as you might think to see this move happen. The results were not getting enough wins, obviously, but they were in games. It was very competitive, but it was a lot of the other stuff. It was that fit. It was wanting to have those conversations with members of the media. It was a lot of stuff that is very different between soccer culture in the United States and in Argentina. And Gabriel Heinze either, and I'm sensing this because of the things that were said when he was hired, that yes, he was going to have to learn the ways of MLS and work here. I don't think he adapted. And I don't know if he just struggled to adapt or if he didn't want to adapt to the way we do business in the soccer community here. And it didn't work. And it was the right change at the right time, even though there was good coaching going on. And even though there was some good performances and some fight in that team, the change needed to be made. And we've seen why after the fact with the better results.
Feels like it's been so long since all of this has happened. So much has happened since that day. But I do remember that game that he was terminated right after was on ESPN. And, I know you were announcing it, so I don't know if you went back and listened to the ESPN broadcast, but I mean, it was about 70% Joseph Martinez talk throughout that game. And then you heard the chants, and, it was probably the most interesting game to have on ESPN of the season, because you wanted to see what they were going to say. And then, you have Taylor Twellman on this. And it's like, okay, well, he's going to talk about this nonstop throughout the game. So I was happy it was on ESPN that day.
Yeah, it was quite the soap opera. And I mean, the crazy thing is that was really minor, I think, in the decision-making process on moving forward with Gabriel Heinze. I'm sure it affected it, but it wasn't the trigger, because Joseph trained the next day. Like, Joseph trained with the team under Heinze on Sunday morning or early afternoon. I can't remember exactly what time they trained. But he was back at that point. And I think Heinze said that he would be back in that post-game availability. So, like, that was another subplot to it that was just chaos. I mean, it was tough. And I think, and it's easy to say now because, look, the Gabriel Heinze hire was the most acclaimed managerial hire Atlanta United's had. It was Tata Martino. There were questions when he was hired. Can he win? What did he do at Barcelona? He had all this talent. He couldn't win a title with Argentina. That was there, and it was real in 2016. We know the questions that surrounded Frank de Boer's hire. Heinze, there really weren't many questions. Everybody thought it was a slam dunk, and it didn't work. It's easy to say now, oh, yeah, it's because of this and that and the other, but it didn't work, and the team is now better for having made the change.
For sure.
How do you see Atlanta United dealing with the long-term injury of Santiago Sosa, especially right now after they picked up Sejdic?
Yeah, got to see what it is, and that's the hardest thing. Is it's a little hard to tell what's going on with Santiago Sosa. We'll probably get some clarity next week, Wednesday or Thursday, before the Orlando game. I'm not sure how long-term it's going to end up being. It's tough because you don't have a ton of depth in that position at the moment, although that's starting to change, and it will probably affect what the tactics look like. Sejdic has been pretty solid as the 6, but Sejdic playing the 6 by himself is different than Sosa playing it by himself. It's just a level of comfort. Sejdic has typically played in a double pivot there, so playing by himself, he has the characteristics to do it, but he doesn't have as much experience doing it. Sosa had a little bit more. He's a little more comfortable in that kind of a role. So you need to get Franco Ibarra back, and that's a question mark as well. What is his timeline looking like? I know it's getting closer, but is he ready for next Friday? Mo Adams was going through some early in the day training at Mercedes-Benz before the last game. So he's active physically, but can he be active participating in matches? Is he ready for Friday? Because if you get Sejdic, who has struggled to play 90 as well, and that's been a challenge because of the demands of the position. If you get Sejdic, you have Josetu in that mix, you get Adams, and you get Ibarra back, even in limited capacities, it gives Pineda more to work with. And it could mean playing 2 in the holding midfield. It could mean 1, but it could mean a different 1, depending on how it goes. He needs more options. And without Sosa, the more options he has, the better to solve that position and that space in the field.
Sejdic has been hurt as well, correct?
Yeah, he's been banged up. It's been a little bit hard to tell. And look, managers and clubs do this for strategic purposes. They like to keep this stuff quiet as much as you can because it forces the opponent to have questions. And I don't know exactly what it is with Sejdic, but he hasn't been able to go 90 in the last 2. He's gotten into the 60-minute mark or so. And, something's been holding him back a little bit. I think they've had to manage his training minutes a little bit. Let's see when we get to next week, because they were able to get an extended break at the beginning of this week. I think they came back to the training facility on Wednesday. So now 3rd day of training. I don't know what the weekend looks like for them. It might lighten up a little bit, but then you're going into a match week and you're playing on a Friday, and you're, I think barring a shocking decision to let him go early, you're not going to have Joseph Martinez or Ronald Hernandez for that match. Depending on how much they play in Honduras on Wednesday night, Miles Robinson and George Bello are question marks on, do they have minutes to give you on Friday, or are they even available on Friday? It's a lot of unknowns right now. So I think for this week, it's been about preparing for Orlando and having as many options as possible. I'm really curious about Adams and Ibarra. Are they going to be active and ready to help out in that game? And is Sejdic 100%, or is he, 90, or is he 80, or what does his limit look like and how long he can play?
I definitely have been enjoying George Campbell kind of coming in as the closer lately, and he even played a little bit of that midfield there towards the end of, I think, the last game. But he's been good.
Yeah, he has. Campbell's a fascinating one. He's right now Bello is the jewel coming out of the academy and what he's doing now with the national team. But Campbell is going to be right there in that conversation as a real credit to the work that has been put in by Atlanta United's academy, because he was a midfielder who really wasn't a vital part of his teams until he shifted to center back. And then he emerged as a top center back in the academy, goes to play for Atlanta United 2 in USL in 2019, and you couldn't get him off the field. He was so good. 2020 was a bit of a crazy year, obviously, for everybody, but for him especially, because he couldn't go back and forth between the twos and the first team. So he pretty much, outside of a very limited amount of minutes in MLS, he pretty much trained the whole year, but trained at the first division level. This year, both with the twos and in his MLS performances, confidence is off the charts. He's such a strong player physically. He's so good on the ball. And he's got a confidence level that you don't normally see with a 20-year-old. Like, he'll dribble past people. He'll take the ball in tight spaces. And in a moment where you don't have really many defensive midfielders, he gets the call to go in and play there in a position that he had experience in, but we're going back 3-4 years. He's able to get it done. He's good enough on the ball to play in there. Is that another element that maybe we haven't seen this week in training, where maybe they've been working with George Campbell to play in that holding midfield a little bit more? It would give you another option. And I think he's got the tools to do it. Be kind of wild to see him as big as he is playing in that holding midfield, but is he ready tactically? Because there's a lot of things that go into that position with, paying attention to where the runners are coming from, getting double teamed at times with 2v1 attacks, and you got to deal with that. Knowing when to step in for the tackle, when to hold off to shield and allow players to recover. There's a lot of thinking that goes into that position, and experience is important. So have they been able to get Campbell maybe ready to be in that mix if needed? It's possible. But he's been outstanding this year.
Yeah, he's been enjoyable to watch.
One last thing that we wanted to touch with you, Jason. What do you think about the Miles Robinson and George Bello role with the U.S. men's national team and these qualifiers? And obviously, in the road ahead, they're young guys, but do you see them really, Miles, he's already a starter, but do you see Bello, having a same role like that, the same relevance in the national team?
I think it's possible for Bello over the rest of the cycle, and I'll take the cycle through the World Cup next year. I think it's possible. I think Miles has established himself as a starter with this team. Is he going to start every game? Not in these qualifiers because of the scheduling. It's kind of wacky with 3 games in a window. You got to manage minutes, but I think he is a guy that in a big game you can trust. If you get into a qualifying situation where it's a must win late in the cycle, yeah, you can trust him to get the job done. And we've seen it. I think the rest of the country is catching up to Miles's development, how good he is on the ball, how good he is at breaking pressure. The 1v1 defending, he's maybe the best the U.S. has in that regard. But his ability on the ball has just gotten so much better. And he's a starting center back at the international level. No question about that to me. Bello needs the opportunity. And there's some guys ahead of him. I think over the Gold Cup, he passed Sam Vines. And I've been banging that drum for a while. I think Vines is a good left back, but Bello's better today, and he's a couple of years younger. The question now is how Greg Berhalter handles the outside back situation with somebody like Serginho Dest, who can play on the left or the right. What's better for the team? I think right now it's for him to play on the right, because I think Dest is better on the right, and Reggie Cannon's not playing regularly at the moment, and he's in a kind of a bad club situation at Boa Vista. Brian Reynolds isn't playing regularly. DeAndre Yedlin is still solid, and his experience helped last night in El Salvador, but Dest is better. And now then on the left side, it's down to between Anthony Robinson and George Bello. And I think that's pretty close to a toss-up. I think Bello can perform in these moments, get forward, contribute going forward. He's so tough to get off the ball when he moves forward. But he's a good defender as well. And I think over the last year, what he's added, he could make plays because of his athleticism, because of his quickness. He could recover really well, kind of similar to Miles early on, where Miles could bail himself out of trouble, where he might have read something poorly and be in a bad position. Bello now is not getting himself into those bad positions. He's not having to make a game-saving tackle. He's in a better position to prevent that now. And talk about confidence with Campbell. I think Bello has shown that as well. And one of my favorite moments of the season for Atlanta United, the Marcelino Moreno goal to beat Montreal late, because it was such a great moment. It was really needed at that point. But go back to the beginning of that play, the take that Bello had on the ball out to him, the confidence to open up, take that touch, beat the defender, smoke the defender at midfield, and carry it forward. The teenager we're talking about in that moment at the end of the game to be able to make that play, he's got something special. And Berhalter can't think about development. Berhalter's got to think about results. But the sooner he can get Bello into the mix, I don't think Bello will let him down in any way. And I think Bello has such a high ceiling on the left side. Your outside back pairing long-term should be Dest and Bello. And I think the sooner you get there, the better off the U.S. men's national team will be.
My favorite goal was in Cincinnati, where Bello passed it to Barco to get it. I was there, so I was really excited. It was right in front of it, but it was just what a play. And I think it even made ESPN top 10 that night.
Oh, in Columbus, the back heel. Yeah.
Or Columbus, I'm sorry, yeah.
That was nice.
Oh, man. Again, just the confidence to have that. And the attacking part we've known about for a while with Bello, but defensively, he was great in the Gold Cup final. There's really not many opportunities you can think of this year, and teams have tried to push him a little bit. They try to get in behind him. I can't think of many times he's been beaten this year at left back. He's very good defensively. He's underrated on that side of the ball.
For sure.
Well, Jason, one last thing that just on the offensive side for Atlanta United, do you feel like, there's a little bit of lack of confidence, at times, when we're in front of goal, because, there's so many chances that, overall, Joseph, we've seen him get somewhat to 100%, but, he's been lacking a little bit of the finishing and everybody else around, honestly.
Yeah, it's a little hard to pin down because even going back to the time under Heinze, like chances were being created. I thought over the time frame of the season, the quality of chances has gotten better. They're creating better chances now than they were a month, 2 months ago. So that's a step in the right direction. But it still feels like there's some disconnect in the attack. I don't think it's confidence. I think with Joseph, a lot of times it's felt like timing. And maybe that is just rebuilding the trust for him in his leg, in his knee. Maybe it's just playing more and kind of knocking the rust off. The more you play, the better you are able to time your leap on a cross, for example. The header opportunity that he had against Nashville that would have equalized, I thought it was a goal. I saw the cross come in, saw where he was. I was like ready to celebrate a goal, and he headed it wide. That's tough. You just have to play through it. You have to keep feeding him. You have to give him those opportunities. I think Araujo is a great addition and a little bit different type of player. And he's creating opportunities for himself and others. And he's been really close. He's had a couple of big saves go against him. You have to just keep going. Barco and Moreno are a little different in that I think they're playmakers first. Marcelino's shown a pretty good scoring touch this season, but they're looking to create for others first. Araujo will look for himself and for others. Joseph obviously is the one to score. I'd like to see them figure out the positioning a little bit more. That's probably the biggest thing I keep coming back to about fixing it. Joseph dropping into the midfield to help build up the play, absolutely critical. It's a good thing to have your forward do that. But the timing of then when Joseph plays it back, he becomes that outlet. They play to him. He plays it out wide or he plays it to somebody else, and then he starts to make his run looping back into the 18. The timing isn't there. Like, ideally, what happens in those situations is you play to Joseph, he plays it back to you or plays it to somebody else. And then when he gets into the 18, the ball is played to him as he's arriving into the 18. That part hasn't happened enough. It's like another touch and another touch. And then Joseph is from a standing position. You want to play to him when he's arriving into the 18. And I think if they can get that timing right or adjust the movement a little bit, maybe now that you have Araujo, you have Barco, you have Moreno, he doesn't have to drop quite as much. He can stay up higher and occupy the center backs and create more space for others. Once they figure out that nuance, I think the attack will start to open up and produce a little bit more. Quality's there. I think even a lot of the development of the attacks is there. It's just the final product hasn't been there. And I think you're down to like kind of subtle things that need to shift.
Well, as we've seen in Seattle, you just got to get hot at the end, get into the playoffs, and they've had some rough middle, early starts, and we're able to get it going at the end and win MLS Cup.
Yeah, that's the nature of MLS. I mean, the schedule's favorable. You got a lot of games at home, a lot of winnable games, period, but a lot of winnable games at home. They have to take care of their business there. The Nashville game, a little bit of a wake-up call against one of the best teams in the East. They're good, and Atlanta's definitely been a lot better than they were earlier in the season, but they're not finished yet. There's still a lot of work that has to go in to being that kind of a team where they get into the postseason and opponents are afraid of them. I think Atlanta has the qualities to be that team. If Joseph starts scoring goals, if Araujo keeps doing what he did against Nashville and just breaking down defenders and multiple times in one sequence, you start to strike fear in the opponents. Brad Kazan's a goalkeeper that you can count on. They have all the qualities to be a team that can get hot and go on a run in the postseason. They just have to keep putting the work in to be better than they've been, and especially in that final third, that attacking final product. They get that part sorted. The rest of it is good enough to win MLS Cup. Right now, they just have to get a home playoff match. That has to be the goal, is get to where you can qualify to host home playoff matches. They can get there. I think they can make a run.
Should be a fun last couple months.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun ride. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
All right, Jason. Well, we're not going to take up much more of your time. We're glad to have you here, man. Hopefully this is not the last time we have you. Unless Tommy has any other questions.
No, just thank you for everything, Jason. I mean, personally for me, I didn't get into soccer until 2017. And everything that you do with Off the Woodwork and the post-game shows and the pre-shows, I pretty much all my knowledge has come from you and Mike Conti. So I just enjoy just listening to just your analysis and the shows that you do on Facebook during the week. It's really helpful to all of us to learn.
No, I really appreciate it. I mean, I found the game early when I was a kid. It's been everything to me, like from when I was 9 years old. So now to actually have a team that we can follow day in and day out at the top level and have these conversations about tactics and spacing and stuff that, when we were just getting a big game a year from Mexico coming to town or a big friendly, you're not getting into that level of it. And now like we can talk about all aspects of soccer culture and soccer development. It's amazing. And thank you for listening. Like I'm so thankful for all the people who listen and interact, and good times and bad. And I get as frustrated as everybody else. I get it, but I feel like we're really lucky to have a club that has been successful so fast, and I think has been so well-rounded in the way that they've built it. I mean, we talked about academy products. You're playing with the national team. There's trophies in the trophy case. And now you're going into a final stretch of the season that will definitely be entertaining. There's going to be a lot on the line. So, we're lucky to have all this. I'm incredibly lucky to just be like a little part of telling the story.
Well, thank you, Jason, man. We really appreciate the time, that you've given to FILA Sports Podcast, and go subscribe on YouTube, all you guys, for on FILA Sports Podcast. You can follow us there, comment, share this content out. And thank you for your time, guys.
Thanks. No, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. We'll talk again soon.
All right, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Have a good weekend.
All right.